Everyone, welcome to our webisode series, Let's Talk About It, Conversations in Sexual and Reproductive Health, Rights, and Justice. We're really happy to have you here, and just to go over our agenda real quick, I'll start with introducing Girl Up and introducing our guest speaker, Oriaku and Njoku, and we'll go into our interview, and thank you for joining. So just to start with, what is Girl Up? Girl Up is a girl-centered leadership development initiative focusing on equity for girls and women in spaces where they are unheard or underrepresented. Founded by the United Nations Foundation in 2010, Girl Up operates a global network of regional affiliates impacting 200,000 girls and youth leaders in 152 countries and all 50 US states, developing transformational leaders who advance gender justice worldwide. So just for the figures again, we have over 200,000 girls and youth leaders in the Girl Up community, and we reach 152 countries worldwide and all 50 US states. So we're a huge community to be a part of, and just some ways for you to get involved. We have clubs and campuses on clubs all over the world. So you should definitely start a Girl Up club or find one near you to get connected to an amazing network of change makers. We also have a huge online community on the Girl Up community page, which you can easily register on to network with Girl Up leaders working together for gender equality. We also have a leadership summit, both a US leadership summit and a free global leadership summit for anyone to join later this month at the end of June. So definitely register for Girl Up's flagship events like leadership summits and our regional summits too. So just a little bit more about the webinar series. So some of the skills we'll be talking about is we'll be working hard on developing a skill set for young leaders like me to tackle the field of sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice, learning from our guest speaker, Oriaku, today. Beyond our skills, our young leaders need to be inspired to act, hearing from leaders who can share their stories and help inspire a new generation. We'll also hear from role models in the field, including Oriaku today, who helps inspire and engage us with her stories and experiences. So just about today's guest speaker, I'm really excited to introduce Oriaku and Njoku. Her pronouns are she/they, and Oriaku Njoku is a first-generation Black, Igbo, Nigerian-American, Kentucky-raised, queer, fat, Southern femme, healing-centered coach, living and loving in Atlanta, Georgia. Oriaku is deeply committed to finding joy and pleasure in everything she does, including the work they do as the executive director of the National Network of Abortion Funds. She believes radical love is a core value that can be embodied and operationalized in movement spaces, and truly believes that we can and will create a cultural shift about how we address abortion, and invites you to join her in making reproductive justice a reality. Thank you so much for joining us today, Oriaku, and I'm really excited to talk with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just a little bit about me. So I'm Tanya. My pronouns are she/her, and I'm right now a junior at Valencia High School in Orange County, California. I currently serve as Girl Up Southern California Coalition Leader and co-president of our Valencia High School Girl Up Club. I've organized events including an LA-wide feminine products drive, girls education fundraiser, weekly STEM classes in Title I schools in my community, and I spoke at the 2022 Makers Conference. I'm also an intern at a city-based nonprofit organization called the Reach Foundation, and at school I play on the varsity tennis team, and I'm passionate about medicine and health, which I explore through Science Olympiad, my research experiences, and volunteering at a local hospital. Girl Up has given me so many incredible opportunities, including this one, so I'm really excited to kick off today. And it's an honor to have the opportunity today to speak with our guest speaker, Oriaku. So I'll stop sharing our slides now and we can get into the interview. So I think I stopped sharing. Thank you so much for joining us, Oriaku. How are you today?
Hello, Tanya. I'm doing well. It's such a pleasure to be here this morning.
It's the same for me. So just to start, I just wanted to kind of hear from you, just introducing your background, a little bit about your story, your childhood and journey kind of to where you are as an activist today.
Yeah, you know what? As you were reading your bio and got to the end, I was like, oh my gosh, that was me. things, volunteering with nonprofits. When I was younger, I thought I was going to be a pediatrician. So it was really cool to hear that. But so both of my parents are from Nigeria, and I spent a lot of my formative years growing up in Bowling Green, Kentucky, which was a small little town in the state of Kentucky. I remember when I was living there, there were about 48,000 people who lived in the town, and it was one of the largest towns in the state.
Oh.
So, is there an echo? Sorry.
No, we're good. I hear you.
Okay. So one of the things
Actually, sorry, I think there is a little bit of a noise coming from your screen. I'm not sure.
Oh,
it's like yeah, it's like a beeping noise. Maybe we can take a pause really quick. At least I'm not sure if anyone else hears that. I do. Okay. Yeah, sorry. You can keep going, Oriaku, about your
okay. So yeah, growing up in Kentucky, there weren't that many Black folks in the area where I used to live. And there were moments where there were times where I didn't feel Nigerian enough for the Nigerian folks, didn't feel Black enough for the Black folks. But the reality is that once I ended up growing up and just continually, consistently being my authentic self, all of it made sense by the time I was 25. But, I really did want to be a pediatrician. There's something about growing up with parents who, in Nigeria, there was the Biafran War, which was the Nigerian Civil War. My dad fought in the war, and one of those things is about autonomy and self-determination. So really the idea of fighting for what's right, fighting for people's decision-making process to make decisions that they feel like are best for themselves, for their families, for their communities. I grew up firmly believing that. And, I didn't necessarily know where I was going with all of that, but that was something always in the back of my head as I was studying and doing all those things before college. I went to college, I took organic chemistry, which was wild, and ended up changing to an ag biotech major and sociology major. And it was such an interesting experience because after doing in my whole life, I had my life set up. And I thought I was going to be a doctor, and that didn't happen. And so what I realized is that I really enjoy talking with people and essentially being like a bridge between folks who are on the ground and folks who are in, different scientific fields. So at that time, doing agricultural or technology, I wanted to really focus on countries in Africa. It just felt right with where my family is from, and folks who did like genetically modified work. And there was still something with that wasn't fully resonating with me. I was part of the LGBTQ work that happened on my college campus, but even at that time, that was before the love is love conversations started happening. And it was really focused on, these are all the things that we don't have. These are all the things that we can't get because you're queer. And that also didn't resonate with me because, being a Black queer woman in the South, just focusing on marriage when I know that even at that time, just face value looking at me, that is an invitation for some sort of discrimination or prejudice. Being queer was also a reason. Combining those two just elevated it to the next level. So I was like, there's something more to this. And then I didn't do anything and just worked several years of retail. So it finally got to the place where I found out about reproductive justice, and that completely changed my life.
Wow, that's a really inspirational story. And I think I really connect the cultural part about your parents coming from Nigeria. And definitely, I think where I am right now, I hope to become a doctor, but I think there's so many opportunities, especially in the sexual and reproductive health and activism space. So it's great to have you today. And thank you for introducing your story. So just to get a little bit into your activism then, what kind of led you to starting your activism in the reproductive justice area? How did you get into that after your retail work?
Yeah, so the end of 2012, I ended up getting fired from the job I was at. I was selling shoes at Bloomingdale's, and a friend of mine was like, "Do you want to come to this reproductive justice training that I'm doing?" I had no idea what it was. So, I was like, "Is that being a feminist?" I mean, I don't like, sure, I'll go. You said free lunch, free breakfast. I'm there because I'm not working. So I ended up going to that training. From reproductive health and reproductive rights. And I think that is an important distinction. The way I like to think about it and the way it was presented was like reproductive health is definitely focusing on the individual right to healthcare. All of the things from menstrual products to fertility to sexual health, all of those things are related in reproductive health, but the focus is on an individual's ability to do that. Reproductive rights, a lot of the focus in that time was like the legal right for an individual to do a variety of things, whether that's have an abortion, have access to contraceptive. That was one thing. But reproductive justice was like, we're talking about being pro-choice and choice as if people have the full spectrum of choices to make the decisions that they feel like are best for themselves and their families. And so when it got to that, the founding mothers of reproductive justice essentially combined reproductive health and rights and then social justice and brought it together. And what that essentially did was, it's moving away from this idea of you can choose or not choose, and really thinking about what are all the things that come into play for why you make the decisions that you make. Those things are race, gender, your zip code, your indigeneity, your gender, all of these things come into play. And so for that, I was like, oh my gosh, reproductive justice is the place where, you read my bio and that's a lot of stuff going on in there, but that is all me, and reproductive justice was that place where I can bring all of me without any shame or stigma. And it was this invitation to unapologetically continue to be myself. So I ended up, after that, I was like, I got to find something to do. So in this movement, this sounds so cool. The following year, I got a job at an abortion clinic. And within the first 3 months, witnessing what was happening as far as access, witnessing the reasons why people weren't getting their abortions, such as rides, or their partner decided, I don't support you anymore, stigma from their family. And, living in the South, we're in the Bible Belt. So this is something, or where I live in the South is in the Bible Belt. And so religion comes into play. I mean, all of these things. And besides the fact, or outside of the fact that it is expensive and it can be really expensive to have an abortion. The average cost of an abortion is around $500, maybe a bit more. And there's so many people from marginalized communities, as in young people, poor people, folks that live in rural areas, Black, Indigenous, people of color, there are all of these things that come into play, and seeing those things be the reason in addition to the cost, I was like, y'all, we got to do something to support people in our community in a more meaningful way. So let's start an abortion fund. Eventually, our abortion fund became one of the largest abortion funds in the National Network of Abortion Funds, providing support for folks in Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Tennessee. And the name of that organization is Access Reproductive Care Southeast, or ARC Southeast, and they are still thriving and doing all the things to make sure Southerners can get their abortions, regardless of all of the laws and, the hostile political climate that we're experiencing here today.
Yeah, thank you. And I think one of the things you said that resonated with me was the way that reproductive justice as a space is really inclusive of everyone. So there's definitely a place for all activists to join the movement. And I think that's really important to share. And of course, there's a lot of challenges women face, people face in getting abortion. So I think we can talk a little bit more about that later. But just I wanted to hear a little bit more about your journey as to become an executive director at the National Network of Abortion Funds. So what advice would you give to activists who want to follow your path and grow as a leader, just starting out in the reproductive justice space? So like, how did you get to the executive director position?
I mean, one of the things I'm like, this is, when I was growing up and it's like, I'm going to be a pediatrician, to now I'm working in abortion access work. It actually was like, wait, how are these things connected? But it actually is connected, It's still a way to give back to community. It's still a way to be yourself and have all of the things that make you be honored and respected. It's a lot about, it's moving from, reproductive health and reproductive rights that was focusing on the me or the individual aspect into the we or the collective, And so that is one of the things that has kept me going, is I'm like, I'm not just fighting for my own rights, which if anyone is doing activism work and doesn't say that they're also doing it for themselves, you got to question it a little bit, because this is not just for us, but it is for all of the people that we live with and work with and love every single day. One of the things too is just like really being grounded in the values that you have. One of my values is radical love. Joy and pleasure, I believe, are part of our birthright. And so being able to experience moments of joy, pleasure, peace, love, all of these things are things that really guide me. And I'm not going to lie, the journey was not easy going through it, but I had to consistently remind myself that I am a human being and not a human doing, which means that having people around me as well to really, who know what this work is like, who know the toll that it takes on our mind and our body and our spirit, making sure to surround myself with people who encourage me to stay grounded, to think outside of the box, that, it's really about the community that you're able to build as well. Even if it's not people within reproductive justice, that is something that's really, really key. But that making sure that you have the conditions set up for your mind, body, and spirit to be in alignment, that is one of the most important things in doing any type of activism work, because of the toll that it takes, And there's something about grind culture where you're like, we got to go, we got to fight, we got to go fight, win, go fight, win, like there's all this stuff, that goes on. And when you start to think about that toll around always responding, always being on the defense, it is exhausting, And so prioritizing rest, prioritizing time to pause and get grounded and get back in alignment so you can continue to do the work is part of, what sustains me as an activist.
Yeah, thank you. That's some really good advice too, and it's great to hear about your journey. And so, just to hear about your day-to-day work, I want to ask, what does your day-to-day work look like now, working in the National Network for Abortion Funds? Just to hear about what you do there as executive director.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I came from one of our member funds, ARC Southeast. And so the transition from being on the ground, tabling, driving folks to their appointments, funding folks' abortions, all of that transition from doing the direct service and building power in our communities to then becoming the executive director of a national organization. I feel like there's a really deep responsibility that I have to be in service of our membership, to really support the other more than or nearly 100 abortion funds that are all over the United States and abroad, making sure that they have all they need to be the experts that they are in their communities, that they have all that they need to not only fund abortion, but to build power in their communities. And so really understanding on a deep, deep level what it takes to be an abortion funder and bringing that into the national scale and even challenging some of my movement partners to be like, who is this for? All of these things that we're doing around policy, around movement building, around mobilizing people. Who is this for first, And if the conditions for folks, the material conditions for people on the ground, which material conditions, like, do you have access to clean water? Do you have access to clean air? Do you have housing or somewhere that you can stay? It's all of the basic things that anyone needs to live until we make sure that those things people feel like their material conditions are being met. Then we can expect to see some of those changes as well. So a lot of it is around at the National Network of Abortion Funds, making sure that our membership is resourced, that I do the work along with the 70 amazing staff members that I work with are doing the work on multiple levels, whether it's programs, it's development, communications, all of these things are so we can support and amplify the work that is happening on the ground with our member funds. So I don't take this work lightly. It's not been easy because I started July 18th, which at NNAF was about 10 working days after the overturning of Roe. And so I knew what I was coming into, but the political climate has been such that it's been a lot. It's been a lot, but I am not discouraged because I know what is possible on the other side. And I firmly believe that doing abortion access work and reproductive justice work is one of many pathways that'll get us closer to our collective liberation. So.
Yeah, I think that's something I'd definitely like to talk more about. But before we get into that, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about your experiences. If you could share the kinds of challenges that people have to face in accessing abortion services, like what you've seen in your work.
There are so many. I could tell a couple of stories that may put this into light. And I'll share this story. The young person gave permission to share the story as well. So I don't share any stories without consent. So that's really important to know. So this young person had been working with us for, when I say months, like several months from when they were in their first trimester. And she kept trying to figure out how to get her abortion. I should also note that she was 16 at the time too. So living where she lived, there was some sort of like parental consent or notification that was required in order to be able to have an abortion as a young person. Otherwise, you can go and get a judicial bypass, which is where you as a young person have to go to the court and state your case for why you feel like you are the ones to be able to make an independent decision about your abortion. So she got her judicial bypass, things were going great. By the time she was actually able to get to the clinic, because there had been lots of things stalling and couldn't get a ride, couldn't leave school, all of these things. By the time she got to the clinic, she was past the limit of where that clinic could continue to provide her abortion, which was at the time she was past 21 weeks. And so from there, what ended up happening during that time is that her mom ended up finding the letter that the court send around notifying the parent that, notifying her parents that she was having an abortion. And that completely changed the dynamic of the whole conversation. It went from, you know, getting that right, being excited about having her abortion, to then now having her parent, her mom, who was undocumented, didn't speak much English, but very Catholic, and knew that her daughter was not the one to have an abortion. And so there was a lot of like tension and back and forth. The day that we were like, okay, we're going to get someone to go pick her up, one of the people on the team to go pick her up and drive her to where she needs to go for her abortion, which was 12 hours away. So my coworker got there, the police were there, a social worker was there because the mom had called the police and was like, this is what's happening. But because she had a judicial bypass, it didn't matter at that time. Like, she was of the legal right to be able to have her abortion. So it got to the point where her mom was like, 1, you're pregnant, didn't know. 2, now you're talking about having an abortion, complete violation. Now the police are involved. Her mom's undocumented. So there was a lot of multiple layers that was coming into play for why this was such a sensitive situation. After a couple more weeks, mind you, now we're getting into like 25, 26 weeks. After a couple more weeks, we were able to say, yes, we got everything set. Her mom was like, fine, do whatever you want. I want nothing to do with this. So coworker went, picked her up, and they drove all the way to the DMV area to have the abortion. So, you know, we're talking about figuring out, because she was a young person and her parent wasn't with her, we had to figure out the ride, where we were going to stay, what she was going to eat during all of that time. I mean, there was all the things to make sure that she was going to be in a comfortable space to be able to have this abortion. She eventually had her abortion, but one of the things that was very interesting is that over the time, her mom was like, how are you? Are you okay? Okay, fine. You know, just like slightly checking in on her. And by the time the procedure was done, they did the long drive back to where she lived. And her mom, who was so against all of this, was like, thank you so much for being there with my daughter during this time. Thank you for stepping in for me when I couldn't. And so that in and of itself, like when this was happening, I'm like, oh. At the same time of all of the legal risks that was possible for, you know, being able to get her abortion. And the highlight of the story is that it was last year, she sent a picture of her in her graduation gown. She graduated with honors. And she was like, thank you all so much for being supportive of me getting my abortion, because that's why I'm able to be here today. She's going to college. She graduated with honors. It was just, the thing that is the story around that for me is all of the logistics around it, but she was confident and knew what was best for herself and for her future as well. And just seeing that, as far as how complicated it was, how much time it took in a time-sensitive manner. You know, when we first talked with her, her abortion was going to be $500. By the time she actually had her abortion, it was like $6,000. So, I mean, in addition to all of the other expenses, but what it comes down to is, even in this moment, treating people with dignity and respect and restoring justice in a moment for anyone who's having an abortion really did take the steps towards, you know, her own liberatory moment in that time. So that is one story. There's so many stories, and I could go on, but I know you have a bunch of other questions. So
yeah, I think that's definitely a really great story to put it into perspective. And I'm so glad that she's successful now, and that I think one of the incredible things about your organization is it makes those personal connections and impacts on people's lives. And I think that's really important, the work you do. So it's really inspirational for me as an activist to hear about that. So just to talk a little bit more about the National Network for Abortion Funds. So apart from the challenges that people face, I know you've mentioned abortion funds a lot through the talk. So just wanted to talk about what exactly does an abortion fund mean, and how do you raise that kind of money?
Oof, yes. So the National Network of Abortion Funds is a really powerful collaborative web of over 100 or nearly 100 abortion funds. And abortion funds are organizations, again, all over the United States and beyond that are working together right now and doing what they've always done, which is moving money and resources and support to people seeking abortions today. While also building the power needed to change our culture around abortion. You know, we share this vision of all people having the power and the resources to care for themselves, their families, and to affirm our bodies and identities and health for in all areas of our lives, you know? And, you know, while we're not necessarily a reproductive justice organization, and that is very okay, we do use the reproductive justice framework to guide the work that we do at the intersections of economics, and gender as well. And so, you know, abortion funds are essentially like this bridge between abortion access as a concept and abortion access as a reality. And one of those things I'll note is that, you know, with Roe v. Wade here in the United States, a lot of folks were like, yeah, abortion is legal. It's great. The reality is that while it was legal, it didn't guarantee accessibility or the availability of clinics. So we're talking about access is like people being able to even get to their abortion, which includes, you know, the logistical or practical support, as we call it, in addition to the actual funding of an abortion. So abortion funds are, you know, taking up this gap that a lot of us hope our states or our governments would fill. And we're the ones coming in and filling the gaps and working with callers who are experiencing all sorts of reproductive oppression and depending on the state that you're in, you know? Abortion funds are so beautiful. A lot of them are volunteer, you know, now a lot more are starting to bring on staff members, but in order to do that, you know, there is money that is needed to really support the infrastructure. So infrastructure like, do you have a database? How are you keeping client information confidential? Do we have a computer at our organization? How are we going to answer these calls and send messages to folks back and forth and doing it in an equitable way, you know? There's also the work around the logistical pieces. So depending on where you are, what state you live in, the reality is that while abortion was legal, again, it didn't guarantee that accessibility. So people have been having trouble accessing abortions for decades. I'm talking decades, ever since Roe went to effect in 1973. And through that, you know, when I'm like, it seems like there had been moments of progress. And then it got to the point in the history of abortion access where, you know, anti-abortion politicians and groups and folks really worked hard and are still working hard to really take away our human right to bodily autonomy, whether that is introducing any sort of legislation. The legislation, y'all, is wild. I mean, there are points where they're like, the blades of grass in your lawn can't be more than however many inches, or you're in violation. They put that into state law in the state of Alabama, you know, when they were able to provide abortions, or you can't put anything on the top shelf at your clinic. I don't even know what that has to do with patient care. But those laws are targeted regulation of abortion providers, or trap laws, essentially to trap folks into making abortions harder and harder to get. And so since we would say in the movement about like since 2011, there was over 500, nearly 600 pieces of anti-abortion legislation that has been introduced in state legislatures to really keep folks from being able to have their abortions. That looks like changing the gestational limit of when you can go. So like a 6-week ban, for instance, is 2 weeks after you miss a period, you know? And I don't know, there are lots of conditions that are around, but abortion funds really do step up and step out to make sure that in spite of all of these things, you as an individual are in choice, and the commitment that abortion funds have to our communities means that we'll do what we can to ensure that you have an experience that affirms you in this moment in your life.
Yeah, and I'm glad you touched on the overturning of Roe, since that's kind of what I wanted to transition into. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about your reaction to it, because I know you said these kind of issues have been going on long before the actual overturning of Roe v. Wade, and how has it affected your activism?
So I started as the executive director of ARC Southeast and as a co-founder in 2016. Every year that I was at ARC Southeast, and we worked in those 6 different states in the Southeast, every single year there was a piece of anti-abortion legislation that was introduced in all of the states. So it's kind of like, you're like, what's next? What's next? What are they doing here? Okay, next year they're probably going to replicate it at this other state. What's happening here? Oh, okay. You know, and so what we were experiencing, and what so many folks in the South and the Midwest have been experiencing, is like the chipping away of our right to an abortion for a while now. So much so that, you know, people talk about this post-Roe reality that we're in right now. And one of those things that we would always mention is that the post-Roe reality that y'all are afraid of is actually the lived experiences of people today, right now, 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, I mean, all of the years that I've been doing this work, until we've gotten to this place where now there's no more legal protection of Roe. In the 7 years that I was with ARC Southeast, there were 4 different Supreme Court cases related to abortion access. So this is like, they're trying everything to make it even harder to access abortions. And so, you know, it was one of those things where what we were experiencing, we saw it. To me, it was not a surprise, but I hoped and expected more from the people that we trust to put into these positions to make decisions that reflect the wants and needs of people in our community. You know, there's a lot of polling that gets done that says 7 out of 10 people agree with abortion. There's numbers that have been pulled that 1 in 4 people between the ages of 18 and 45 will have at least 1 abortion in their lifetime. And so this is something that is happening, you know, and the folks are like, people on the ground, people who are pregnant people are like, I want to be able to make this decision for myself. And folks are making it really hard to be able to do that. So the climate was such where it's like, it wasn't a surprise. Yes, I hoped for more, knowing that it was coming, especially after May 2nd, and we saw the leak, you know, the Supreme Court leak that was giving a signal to how Roe was going to be overturned. On the day that it happened, I took a deep breath and I shut down my computer. And I was like, I need to meditate, honestly. I need to meditate and stretch, because what we're now up against is something that it took almost 50 years to overturn Roe, you know? And that was a long game. And the idea that we would, and the idea is not just to restore Roe, because Roe was never enough, you know? And we're saying never enough is like focusing on the legality of abortion was never enough. We also needed to ensure that clinics stay open, to ensure that abortion funds are still able to support people in getting their abortions. So I took about a couple hours and I meditated and stretched and did some deep breathing, because I'm like, all right, this is now the long game. This is what we've been preparing for. And what do we need to do to really support the work going on forward? Fundraising for that has, initially, once it overturned, people were so surprised. And there was this overwhelming influx of contributions that were coming in once Roe was overturned. But what we knew as abortion funders, especially ones living in really hostile areas, is that anytime there was an abortion ban, there was always this quick, like, okay, donate to abortion funds. And it would be cool for like a couple months, and then it would die down. Same thing has happened with Dobbs, or the Dobbs Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe, which means that over time, it's just gotten harder and harder and harder to fundraise, even as we're approaching the 1-year anniversary. But there are still good stories around how people are preparing for this moment too. We just finished our Fundathon, which is like an annual peer-to-peer fundraising, which a lot of the donations are average around $50 when people donate. So from $1 to $5 to however much you decide to contribute. These are things that it really is this reflection of how the community comes together to make sure that in spite of what we're experiencing, we're coming together to support. Our original goal was 1.5 million, and we doubled that. And I knew we were going to double it. I knew it. I was like, oh no, okay, 1.5, we did it. Cool. 2 million, got it. 2.5. The last night I was like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And that to me is something that we've done every year as a network. And this year felt especially important, knowing that, folks haven't forgotten about abortion funds and the work that we do. So yeah, it's just part of this long game that we're in, even though our lives and our existence, like we're not political pawns to be used, during election cycles or anything like that. So
congratulations. That's incredible, doubling the amount, your goal. That's really cool and inspirational for us. And I know we don't have too much time left, but I just wanted to also touch on what advice would you give to activists about having open conversations with people who disagree with the pro-choice cause? Because I think that's something a lot of us struggle with, having those open conversations, especially since you worked in the South. How did you go about doing that?
Yeah. First, it's having the conversation with people that you trust, building up. How do you have those conversations? How are you talking about it? Really thinking about and hearing different ways that folks have been successful, that your peers have been successful, is something that's a really great first step. So you get comfortable with having the conversation before you start introducing it to folks who you're not sure where they stand. One of the other ways, and my favorite ways of having the conversation when I start to hear someone is anti-abortion or anti-choice, I start talking about values,
Mm-hmm.
And so asking questions like, do you believe that you and your family should be the only ones to make decisions about what your family looks like and what your family does for your future? I would say a majority of people would say yes. They're like, okay. Do you want to live in safe and sustainable communities? Yes. Do you want to raise your kids in those communities? 100%. Well, what you're talking about is reproductive justice. That is reproductive justice, making sure that all of the conditions are met, making sure that you have your human rights. So really going to the values, whether it's like, do you love your community and you want everyone in your community to thrive? Love is a value. Do you believe in all of us coming together to support one another and making decisions and living the best lives that we can? Yeah, these aren't questions that you cannot say no to, but understanding that the definition of reproductive justice is our human right to bodily autonomy, to be a parent, to not be a parent, and to raise our families in safe and sustainable communities. I don't know anyone who would be against that, And so when it gets to the actual conversation about abortion, that does, it really does get difficult. And I would say if you feel like your safety is number one. If you feel like you are not in a safe place or a brave space to be able to speak up and speak out against various reproductive oppressions, your safety comes first. Don't do it. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible. It just hasn't happened yet, or the culture hasn't changed in the ways that it needs to. But I would say, build your community, know what your values are, be grounded in that. And also one of the things too is like the narrative piece of it. So sharing stories, sharing what experience people have, but that also requires you to like be in tune and in touch with your communities. And I would say any of the work that y'all are doing here at Girl Up, especially focused on the sexual and reproductive justice piece, that's setting y'all up for success, And it's really exciting to know that there is this container that you all can like play and imagine and be in principled struggle with one another, knowing that even though you all are all together around, amplifying the voices of young women and femmes and girls, that there still may not be values alignment with some of the things that y'all believe in. And that's okay. What we want is for people to get to that place where we see that all of the things that we care about are intertwined and required to have an understanding on, so we can all get free.
I think that's a great message. And I'm not sure how much time we've left, but if real quick, I just wanted to ask, because personally, I'm really inspired by all the work you do and the National Network for Abortion Funds does. So I'm just wondering, how can young change makers like me contribute to National Network of Abortion Funds mission and goals in the future? What can we do to help your cause?
I love this question. So what you can do, there are a couple of things, but first I would check on abortionfunds.org, visit our website. You can find your local abortion fund, and you could do it by state. So we have abortion funds in almost every state in the US. There's some like deserts of where we don't have funds, but look into it and see where's your closest abortion fund. From Mississippi to California, there are abortion funds all over. And so one of the things I would say is, whether you check in, see if there's anything that they need support with, because capacity to do this work is a really big deal. I would also say that y'all could do your own house parties. You can start your own fundraiser. You could fundraise together, make it fun. While you're at various marches, you can say fund abortion, build power. There's all sorts of things that you could do to raise awareness, whether it's money, whether it is your voice. All of these things are huge contributions in order for us to shift the culture around abortion. But yeah, check in with your local funds, see if there's an abortion or not an abortion, but see if there is something that you could do with your community and with your local funds to amplify and support the work that they're doing on the ground as well. So even though we're in a network, the first thing I'll say is like, find your local fund. They need you for sure.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. And I think we have to wrap up for today, but it was such an honor to speak with you, Oriaku, and thank you so much for joining us today. So to just wrap up, thank you everyone for listening in today, and I really hope you learned a lot from Oriaku. Personally, I did, and yeah, definitely tune into our other sexual and reproductive health, rights, and justice webinars. Thank you for joining.